We have House Bill 4288. This is a bill to amend the Income Tax Act and allow members of flow-through entities the opportunity to claim their state and local deductions at the federal level. The bill allows flow-through entity members to elect to pay a flow-through entity tax and receive a tax credit. Vice Chair Tisdale is the sponsor of this legislation, and I want to invite him up to speak to the bill. I think he's going to do it from up here to save time. So when you're ready, Vice Chair Tisdale, please begin with your testimony.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Chair Hall and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you about this important tax issue. Before being elected to the Michigan House, I was a small business LLC partner in an independent agency specializing in medical liability insurance. Making our state's tax system more fair and transparent for individuals and businesses is one of my top priorities now. House Bill 4288 would treat flow-through entities, S-corporations, partnerships, and LLCs the same as larger C-corporations relative to paying and deducting state and local taxes, which have the acronym SALT. This bill does not decrease the amount of taxes paid to the state. It simply restores a legitimate tax deduction to a class of small business owners that is currently only available to larger C corporations. The 2017 Federal Tax Cut and Jobs Act placed a cap of $10,000 on state and local tax deductions that today hurts as many as 245,000 Michigan employers organized as S-corporations, LLCs, and partnerships. Michigan businesses organized as C corporations, again, still enjoy this legitimate tax deduction. This bill would help many Michigan businesses during this challenging time by restoring the SALT deduction without reducing state revenues. This change will also help Michigan businesses keep their money in our economy. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Treasury and IRS has put out guidance to states seeking to make this change, which is currently happening in as many as 15 other states right now. House Bill 4288 represents an opportunity to help employers across Michigan by lowering their federal tax burdens. It would ensure that we, as a state, continue to make our tax system more fair and competitive with other states by making this change right now. Thank you, Chair Hall.
Thank you, Vice Chair Tisdale. And, no one ever does this, but I want you to know. So we have Brian Reardon coming up in a little bit. He's president of the S-Corp Association. We have Charlie Owen coming up from NFIB. And I've invited Brian Calley from SBAM, and then hopefully Treasury. So just so you have an idea, no one ever tells me who's testifying, and hopefully that'll help you get a feel for where you want to ask your questions. I think we have a question from Representative Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So trying to understand this bill, and it's one of the most complicated tax bills I've read in my time here, but the way I understand it is our Michigan businesses are going to be able to save money, and it's not going to affect our state revenues whatsoever. It's stuff that's happening in other states as well.
Correct.
So what would be the opposition to something like this? Seems like a great bill in my mind.
I'm unaware of any opposition.
Good. Thanks for bringing this forward.
Okay.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Any other questions for Vice Chair Tisdale? All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Tisdale, for your testimony. I will now ask Brian Reardon, who's on Zoom, I'm told, who's the president of the S-Corporation Association, to tell us about this bill, to testify on it. So do we have you ready to go? And when you're ready, Mr. Reardon, please begin.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. I'm Brian Reardon, president of the S-Corp Association. We also run the Main Street Employers Coalition, which is a coalition of trades here at the national level, includes the Farm Bureau, Restaurant Association, other folks. And the point of the coalition is to work for tax parity for pass-through businesses, businesses that are organized as S corporations, LLCs, and partnerships. And then, I think it's appropriate here that those are the beneficiaries of this bill. I think I'm supposed to do this PowerPoint, so let's see. Can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we can see it.
I love it. I love it when technology works. So,
And just real quick, I think
3 years ago,
I think everyone has a
testified.
copy of this too at their desk.
Yeah, 3 years ago, I testified in Lansing on this issue. It was just a year after Congress had passed the 2017 tax bill. And the challenge that we faced in the tax bill was, as Vice Chair Tisdale indicated, the uneven treatment of the new SALT cap on pass-throughs when you compare them to C corporations. The easy way to think about it is that under the new treatment, if you're a business and you pay taxes at the entity level, so the business itself writes the check to Michigan, then those taxes continue to be deductible at the federal level. You can deduct them as a business expense. And since all C corporations pay their taxes at the entity level, they continue to be able to deduct these taxes. However, if, as with flow-through businesses like S-Corps and partnerships, the tax flows through, or the income flows through to the owners, and then the owners write the check to Michigan, that is now subject to that new $10,000 cap. Since most states recognize the flow-through treatment, this disallowed or limited the amount of SALT that S-Corps and partnerships across the country were allowed to take, and therefore put them at a competitive disadvantage with the C Corp down the road. We didn't think that was fair. And so beginning in early 2018, we began this effort to encourage states to enact the bill that's before you today. It's something that's going to have broad application. You can see on the slide here the number of, the types of industries that would benefit. It's something that would be particularly helpful right now at a time when a lot of these businesses are either closed or operating at less than full speed because of the pandemic we're dealing with. So the bottom line is, it's going to help out the businesses, as Representative Tisdale indicated. It doesn't cost Michigan any money. The fiscal note that I just saw from this morning confirms that it would be revenue neutral to the state. It is a big deal. And when we debated this 3 years ago, I believe the Department of Treasury estimated that this would save Michigan businesses about $190 million a year. So if we had enacted it 3 years ago, and it would have applied in 2018, 2019, 2020, Michigan businesses would have been able to keep in Michigan almost $600 million that was eventually sent to the federal government instead. So this is a big deal. It affects a lot of businesses, and it's going to save Michigan companies a lot of money. On this slide, you can see we've been active in Wisconsin. Was an early adopting state. We're active in Minnesota. We have a bill that's pending, and I think it's likely to be part of the big budget bill that they're going to put together later this spring. Other states have legislation introduced in Ohio. We just got the bill done in Alabama. As Representative Tisdale indicated, we're active in about 15 states total. 8 states have already enacted this, including a large number of blue states and red states. We've got New Jersey and Rhode Island have enacted this, as well as Oklahoma and Louisiana. So this is an issue that cuts across partisan lines, and it is very much something that there's been limited opposition to it, both in all these states. As I said, it is a big deal. This slide is designed to show that. I think that and maybe it doesn't capture it quite enough, because what it says is that in Michigan, the loss of the SALT cap raises effective tax rates on pass-through entities by 1.3 percentage points, 1.6 percentage points. That's percentage points. It would be the equivalent of corporations these days are taxed at 21%, be the equivalent of raising their tax level to 22, 23, 24%. I think if you tried to do that, you would hear from all the corporate citizens in your state. That's the impact that this has on the pass-through businesses in Michigan. One of the biggest challenges that we face, and I think the reason that we were unsuccessful back in 2018 in Michigan in getting this bill signed by the governor, was concern that the IRS was going to disallow these deductions, much in the same way that they disallowed the charitable workaround that some states did, like New York and California, to get around the SALT cap at the individual level. We've spent a lot of time over the last 3 years building the legal case for what we're doing. We drafted up a legal opinion based on what Wisconsin did, but it applies to other states as well. We spent a lot of time going in and meeting with the Treasury folks, explaining what we're doing, and laying out the legal underpinning for the whole idea. That culminated last November when the IRS issued Notice 2020-75. It's summarized here, but effectively what it did was it blessed these efforts. It said that the IRS is not going to pull the rug out from under it. In fact, they're going to promulgate rules that make it clear that these deductions are legitimate. And the way that the bill is structured here in Michigan and elsewhere, they're not going to challenge it. So this was a big deal. And I think it's one of the reasons you're seeing this reform moving in so many states right now, because this was the biggest hurdle that we faced. The concern was, oh, why do we go to all this trouble and get companies to make this election and claim these deductions if the IRS is just going to come back a year or 2 years from now and disallow it? This gives taxpayers, and it should give the state, confidence that that's just not going to happen. As I said, we're active across the country in all forms of states, red, blue, purple. These are the 8 states that have enacted it to date. And then on the right, you can see a number of states where we have legislation introduced or actively being introduced. You can add to this list Colorado and Virginia. We're active in Colorado. We're getting legislation introduced. And in Virginia, we've got a sponsor lined up, and we expect to see a bill done next year. They have a truncated session this year. But you can see that a lot of states are taking advantage of this issue. And, again, as Representative Tisdale said, it's a chance to reduce taxes on your resident companies, and it doesn't cost the state anything. I'll talk about real quick the mechanics, because I think people, as one of your speakers mentioned, that it does seem complicated. On the left here, there's really 4 steps to this. The first step is it should be an election. That is, not all businesses are going to benefit from this policy or would want to make tax payments at the entity level. So the first key thing is to make this election. Let them self-select if this is in their interest to do so. If they make the election, then effectively what you're doing is having the entity, the business, pay the tax to Michigan as opposed to the individual owners, which they do right now. The tax rate is the same, 4.25%. So the tax collected is going to be the same. You then provide those owners, in the case of the Michigan bill, with a tax credit so that they're not double taxed. One of the benefits of being a pass-through is that you face just a single layer of tax. We want to preserve that. So if the entity pays the tax, then the owners get a tax credit equal to their pro rata share of the tax that was paid. And then finally, you want to recognize the reforms that are made in other states. Our goal is to create a matrix or a whole map of states that have enacted this reform, with all the states recognizing the reforms that are made in the other states, so that you're not, if you are a Michigan resident and you own an S-Corp that does business, say in Ohio or Wisconsin or Minnesota, you're not going to get double taxed on that income because the tax is being paid in those states at the entity level. So we want to preserve that single layer of tax. We want to make sure that it's a uniform policy across the country. And if you do those things, bottom line is that, as somebody indicated, you're talking about there's up to 250,000 S-Corps and partnerships in Michigan that could benefit. Not all of them will, but that's the total pool of potential beneficiaries. The math on the right here, we did an example of a business where, say you've got a husband and wife, the wife has a business, the husband is a teacher, the wife makes $150,000 with her business, the husband makes $50,000 as a teacher. You can see under current law, They pay $8,500 in state tax, almost $30,000 in federal tax, and then you see their total tax. The way this works is that now the wife's income would be taxed at the entity level, say it's an S-Corp, that generates $6,375 worth of tax. That is now deductible at the federal level. So that's why when you look at the federal tax, suddenly their federal tax drops from $29,000 to over $27,000. They're saving $1,400 because you now have restored that SALT deduction that was taken away in 2017. You can now deduct that $6,375 on your federal taxes because it's been paid at the entity level. That's where the savings comes from. And you can see for the state, they collect the same amount of revenue, $8,500. One of the keys to this policy is that it's going to benefit businesses of all sizes. So it's certainly, obviously, the more tax you pay to Michigan, the bigger your deduction at the federal level is going to be. But if you're a small business where, say, you make $75,000, and under the new rules, you're probably taking the standard deduction at the federal level, which these days for a couple is $24,000. You can still benefit from this because you can make the election, pay the tax at the S-Corp or partnership level, get that SALT deduction so it reduces the business income flowing to you as the business owner, and you can still take the SALT deduction. So this tax or this policy will benefit businesses of all sizes. And that's, I think, one of the strongest arguments that we have for it. And again, revenue neutral to the state. I think that covers it. One of the concerns that has been raised in many states is the issue of complexity. We have experience now with a number of states implementing this. In most states, the cost of implementation to the departments of revenue or treasuries has been in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. We have a number of fiscal notes showing that that's what they estimate. In Oklahoma, I've talked to the tax department there. That's what they said it actually cost them. So it's actually, they put it into policy and it cost them about $200,000. The take-up rate has been significant. In Oklahoma, they said that they got many more take-up companies to make this election than what they anticipated. Some of the fiscal notes estimate that the take-up range is going to be about 50% to 2/3 of the eligible businesses. So in Michigan, that would be tens of thousands, if not more than 100,000 businesses benefiting from this. And as I said, it would be a benefit that applies across the income spectrum. It's not just something for companies or taxpayers that itemize. It's something that applies to all taxpayers under certain circumstances. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know there are other folks that want to testify on behalf of the bill, but again, I really appreciate you guys taking this up. I really appreciate the interest, and I hope that you'll be able to do it. As I said, the savings to Michigan businesses are going to be significant, and it all comes at the cost of the federal treasury. It doesn't cost the Michigan treasury a single penny. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you. And maybe, if you're available, when we do take this up for a vote, maybe you can be there on Zoom for that too, if there are questions that day too. I know it's complex and there was a lot there, but I'll go to Vice Chair Yancey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you give us an idea of what income level the primary beneficiaries of the bill will be? Will it be a realization for lower to middle income taxpayers or high income taxpayers?
Well, two things. One, the more taxes you pay to Michigan, the bigger the deduction will be. So I'm not sure if that's, I think the companies would rather pay less taxes to Michigan, but to the extent that they're paying more taxes to Michigan, they will get a bigger deduction. However, as I indicated, there's no floor for how low your income can go, and you can still benefit from this. This will benefit companies of all sizes, of all income ranges. And obviously there are more companies in Michigan, making 100,000 than there are companies making 1 million. So the predominant beneficiaries of this are going to be smaller businesses.
I think you had a follow-up, Vice Chair Yancey. Oh, you didn't? Okay. I just heard. It's hard because sometimes I think you can't hear us, and I think you were trying to say something. And so, all right. Well, I wanted to ask you, it sounds like just make sure I heard this correctly. In other states you've been doing this in, did you say the implementation costs for the Treasury were what? How much were they?
In the $200,000 to $300,000 range.
Okay. That's good to know. I had one other question. I was writing this down as you were going.
I can give you, I'm sorry, I can give you examples. So for instance, Maryland passed it last summer. They estimated it would cost $226,000 a year to implement this. As I said, Oklahoma, it was $200,000 a year. Arkansas is in the process of doing it. They're estimating that it would cost them $225,000 a year. So significantly less than the fiscal cost that the Michigan Department of Treasury has estimated.
Okay. And what would you say to people who say, theoretically in 5 years, this could go away, or we think that this politician will get rid of this at the federal level or keep this? I mean, as we're trying to set policy in our state, do you have any insight into this matter? I mean, of how long this will be in place and how we can set policy as lawmakers trying to predict what the federal government's going to do?
Sure. Yeah, as you can imagine, this is something we thought a lot about. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, and there's always a policy risk when you base one policy on another policy that something can change. I do think that the concerns that the Congress with the new leadership and the new administration is simply going to repeal the SALT cap. I think they're overstated. There are political and revenue challenges to doing that. The revenue challenge is that, the SALT cap, it's $80–90 billion a year out of the federal treasury if they just did that. So it's significant cost. The politics are difficult. There are also other mitigating factors. So for instance, if they do a big tax bill later this year, which we expect many parts of the Biden tax proposals that he ran on to be part of it, including a cap on itemized deductions at a 28% rate, including a restoration of the P's limitation on itemized deductions. If they include both of those, then there's going to be a benefit to paying these taxes at the entity level, because at the entity level, you get to deduct 100% of these costs. If it goes and it's subject to itemized caps and limitations on the individual level, you're not going to be able to deduct 100%. There will continue to be a benefit, even if the SALT cap goes away, which I doubt. And then finally, all of this is supposed to sunset in 2026. That may happen, but my expectation is that, much as we saw with the fiscal cliff in 2012, there will be negotiations leading up to 2026 and some sort of a compromise package that extends some of these policies. Some of them sunset, some of them are just altered, will take place, which means that it's entirely possible that some form of a SALT cap will continue on beyond 2025. It really, at that point, it depends on who's in the White House, who's running Congress, where the votes are. So it's impossible to predict. But my expectation is that you're not just going to have a simple cliff where all these policies expire on the same day. That would be very unusual for that to happen.
Thank you. Vice Chair Yancey.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. For the other states that implemented, once they actually passed the legislation, how long did it take for them to actually implement the new tax system?
Some of them did retroactively. So Oklahoma, they did reach back to the beginning of the year. Others have done it prospectively. So some of the bills that are being considered right now would start in 2022. One of the bills actually reaches back all the way back to 2018, I think the bill in Arkansas, so that businesses would be able to go back and capture those savings that they didn't get because they didn't make the change in 2018. And that's the point I would emphasize here, that, this bill was vetoed on one of Governor Schneider's last days. And it was vetoed primarily over concerns that the IRS was going to pull the rug out from under the policy. If Governor Snyder had instead signed it, Michigan businesses would have saved about $600 million over the last 3 years. So that's just $600 million that, was lost over concern that turned out not to be accurate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Johnson.
Thank you. So we can go retroactive with this, is what you're telling me?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think,
The cost,
many legislatures, in Congress, they have concerns about retroactive applications of tax hikes. This is a tax reduction. And because it's an election, you can have confidence that, businesses that would not benefit from this, they just won't make the election. So I think the Department of Treasury is probably having a heart attack right now, but there's no legal reason why you can't, there's administrative reasons why it might be difficult, but there's no legal reason why you couldn't go back a few years.
how far back can we go? What's the furthest date we could legally go?
Well, to benefit the businesses, you would go back to the beginning of 2018 because that's when the SALT cap took effect.
And that's
So-
no extra cost to the state. I mean, once you implement the program, it's implemented. So it seems like we should probably go back as far as possible and save businesses money. It doesn't cost us anything extra. Thank you.
Thanks. Did you want to make a comment to that, Representative Tisdale?
Well, just that the bill that's in front of us now is retroactive to January 1st of this year. I think if you moved that retro date back further, my guess is that all it would require is just amending those prior tax filings, and I don't know exactly what's involved in that or how far you can go back with those kinds of amendments by existing tax law. But the bill that's in front of us today is retroactive to J1 of this year, January 1 of this year.
And maybe we'll explore that further. Representative Farrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. Did you say Treasury was going to testify?
They're on our list, yeah. But
Okay.
remember, we only have 30 minutes left.
Yeah, no, I
so-
understand. I was just curious because he mentioned the implementation cost was only 200 to 300, and on House Fiscal, they have it 8 to 10 million. So I was just curious.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's certainly a discrepancy there between what what Treasury says and what's happened in every other state. So it'll be interesting to hear their reason for that.